Dona eis requiem.
All right, so our shade has dried. Our guy looks pretty good now, uh, and we're gonna move on to dry brushing. Now, dry brushing, what it is, we're gonna use a different brush. The brush I use for this looks like this. It's very floofy, if you will. I don't know. It's got a more fluffed out tip. Um, you can get a brush that way or make a brush that way by overusing it, but I happen to have one. This is what I use for dry brushing. And what we're going to do is we are not going to put our brush in water, so water off to the side, and we are going to dry brushing is going to do highlighting. So basically, for instance, here on the ribs, we're going to pick up a little of the original color, which was that off-white color, and then we're going to have too much on the brush, so we're going to brush it off on a piece of paper. Now, white on white will be hard to tell, so usually with a darker color, you go until you just barely see it, or don't see it at all anymore. I may do it on my finger, until it gets real faint, and so you have just kind of almost dry particles of paint on there. Your brush is dry for sure. And then you go over an area, like say on the ribs here, and we will just brush down like that across the ribs. So the idea here is, if these were the ribs, that we would come across the tops, and we would not get down into the crevices. We would just come across the tops and leave paint on these, and it will highlight, basically. So before we were doing shading, now we're doing highlighting. So we'll dry brush here, the shoulder blades, the top of the head, because now that base color has become a little darker with the dark wash on it. Now we'll go back over and highlight. So we've got dark paint down in the shadowed recesses, if you will. And now we'll put a little bit lighter paint over the top in the brighter areas where the light would reflect off of it or illuminate it better. So without further ado, we're just gonna barely dab at it. You don't need much at all. Honestly though, I'm thinking it may have dried out a bit. I probably need more water in my palette. And that's my bad. So I'm going to drag a little bit, but normally you're going to just blot it slightly. So now if I come to my finger with this, it should be almost imperceptible at first. You should really have to do several passes for this to make any difference. But if I do it over and over and over, and here's a good example even, on the ridges of my fingernail, we should see now just a slight layer of paint. That's really hard to detect. So I'm going to grab a little bit more of that. Always check on something, like if it's light, check on a piece of dark cloth or paper, like a napkin or something, if it's light, if it's a dark paint, you can do it on a paper towel pretty easily and see if you've got enough. All right, let's see how this comes out. And if it comes out bad, if it's too much, you're like, oh no big deal. Let it dry a bit, go get the wash, come back over it, wash it again. So we're going to dry brush individual little areas. Now, because this is somewhat color specific, we don't want to dry brush white onto the shaft of the scythe. That would make sense, or onto the metal of the scythe. And if you have something with lots of different colors, you got to be careful about how you're doing this. So you might want a smaller brush than this. But for the skeleton, this is perfect. And you can already see it starting to highlight the ribs there. So, and this takes several passes. You're better off, again, it's like the measure twice, cut once. You would rather have less than to do too much all at once, because you can't take the paint off very easily once you've done it. Now see here, I dipped into the white. I got some white, some actual white on there, way too much. So we're gonna want to brush that off, and at no point in doing this are we going to go to the water. All right, so I got to stay out of that white area there where it's still real wet. That's better. In all honesty, I might need to mix a little bit of paint for this to work well. I feel like I will. I think I've let my paints dry out a bit too much. So what I'm going to do is grab my original brush, my layering brush, and I think I've still got plenty of white right here. So I'm going to get a little bit of water. I'm going to get a little dab of brown, and I'm going to come back to here and mix up a new spot of off-white. And there it is. That's pretty good right there. That's maybe even a little brighter than before, but that's okay. We're going for highlights. As always, we don't want to leave paint in our brush, so we're going to clean our brush out real quick. I'm going to move this guy. Clean out our brush. Should only take a second. And if you've got a piece of cloth like this and you've used it and it's just absolutely full of paint, flip it, use a different side, or go get another one. Don't risk getting going over, you know, a big splotch of red and getting some red in your paintbrush as you're trying to clean it. So if your cloth you're cleaning with is dirty, get a new cloth. If your water gets absolutely chock full of paint and it's like, you know, colored pretty heavily, pour out your water, get new water. It's not a big deal. Should be pretty easy. All right, right back to it. Now, see, we've got quite a bit. So when I pull this up here, you'll actually see I've got a lot on the brush there. That's too much. That's way too much. So we're just gonna come over here and brush this off. And that's gonna be very hard to see. I think what I'll do is I'm gonna flip this paper towel inside out. Sorry for Discord there. And yeah, here we go. So now we've got something a little darker that we can brush against to make sure we're getting it off. That's not perfect, but now we'll go on the finger. Okay. You should almost really not be seeing anything. This is one of those minor details. It's almost imperceptible at first, and it builds upon itself. And it takes time. Here, we're going to do the forehead, or the top of the head. I'll use the back of my knuckle here as a tester. Okay. I may have gotten even a little too much on there. This is what my concern was, that if there's any little bits of rough plastic ridges, they'll really catch this and bring it out more than I want it to. And that's a feature of my model, being too rough. Not something I can really do anything about. We'll do the face here. So it'll get the eyebrow ridges. And if there was a nose sticking out, we'd get the nose. Let's do the shoulder blades. You want, like, I don't know, I'd say 90 to 95% of the paint off your brush. Sorry, I realize we've gotten out of frame. But this contrast between highlighted areas, shaded areas, and the areas of color in between will really make your model pop. It's really going to bring it out alive. You don't want to highlight up underneath areas where it should be dark, because that doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's do the front of this hand. Okay, we're getting almost done here. I'm going to do like a top of this arm. There we go. The shoulder. Front of this shoulder. Top of this knee. And maybe these toes a little bit. And you'll notice it's sprinkling little microscopic particles of paint down on the base there. You can usually blow those off or just go over them with black later. Now, for instance, something like the toes is a perfect example. You want to go this way across the ridges so it'll leave the paint up on top of the toes. If you go this way, you'll be painting down into the cracks. You don't want that. So that's it. It's a pretty minor step. It doesn't take too long if you've only got one color like this. And you can just kind of practice back and forth with this and shading until you get what you want. I'm going to stop there. That's good enough for me, I think. All right. I'm going to pause here, clean up my paints for a moment. All right, so after comparing our current skeleton with our target skeleton, I realized I want to do a little more dry brushing. I think he's still a little too dark, and I think he needs to be lightened up a little bit. So we're going to do a little more dry brushing, kind of almost all over. And so I'm going to dab that down in there. I'm going to get a good bit on here. Then I'm going to start brushing it off. I really can't tell where it's at on the... See, there we go. There's a little more. Can't tell whether if I'm getting it off or not on the white of the paper towel, so I'm going to use my finger. Now I'm going to start in an area that's less conspicuous, like the back. Yeah, there we go. That's what we just wanted to see. Just want to make sure we don't have any big globs on there before we start. And you can actually brush pretty vigorously if you're going to do a larger area, which I am. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Let's do this arm. All right, I think we'll hit the front now. There we go. Starting to pull out a little more of that skeletal white look. Now, of course, you could go with your skeleton doesn't have to be lighter colored. You can have a darker colored skeleton. He's maybe more, rotted. You can skip this phase. You don't have to do dry brushing. I've done a lot of models where I did no dry brushing whatsoever. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Let's see. What have we not hit? Like I said before, you generally want to go across things and not along things, because you don't want to dip down into valleys. And we could highlight the shaft of this pole. We could highlight the top ridge of this scythe with those appropriate colors. I'm not going to go that much into detail. It's kind of going to be lost almost. But if you have a larger wooden object, maybe a chest that you're painting, you might want to highlight the wood color along the top. I got a little white in there, I can tell right now. Yeah, look at that. Bright white. Don't want to get that on my model. At least not a big splotch of it, a little bit. If I'm dusting it, the difference between the bright white and the off-white is going to be, I don't think you'll be able to tell. Yeah, now our bony boy is starting to look like a skelly. Proper skeleton. He's ready for Halloween. Prepared to terrorize the living. Right? That's better. Yeah, there we go. All right, let's see. Do a side by side. Yeah, that's better. Obviously not quite as fine a detail as the molded model, and a little rougher obviously from the printing, but still, you put these guys at a distance, you know what I mean, and I think you're gonna have a hard time really picking out flaws when they're on the table a foot or two from you. Shift the camera up here. And so that's, maybe about the distance that they might be from you, maybe a little further. And those both look good. Let's rotate him around. See, look at that guy. All right. Okay. In the next video, I will work on, I'll show you guys the basing, which is going to be adding, let's see if I can get this to focus, adding all that rubble that you see on the model on the right. I'll show you the basing technique for that. We'll add it to this plain base so he will look a little more interesting, and then after that, it's a real simple application of enamel to seal everything to make sure the paint is less likely to chip or fade over time. But I think we're getting along good.